Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Brannan Hancock. Now, Brannan is the Technical Induction Manager at Alfa Financial Software. Brannan has got a fantastic educational background. He actually studied a master's degree in engineering at the University of Oxford and also Princeton University, where he did his master's in engineering. Now, Brannan heads up the employee resource group, or inclusion community, as it's called at Alfa, which he chairs the LGBTQ plus area for the business, and that is across the board, which is very, very exciting. And I know he's been instrumental in making sure that there's been positive changes that happened there, not only within the internal community, but also recruiting other members into that community and speaking out about a number of the great issues that are at the forefront of the LGBTQ plus community. So welcome to the show, Brannan.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. And Brannan, for those of our listeners who perhaps don't know you as well as I do, I wonder whether you might be able to just give us a little synopsis and a summary of how Brannan came to be where he is today, both professionally and also personally, because clearly very passionate about LGBTQ+, because it's a voluntary piece that you do internally at Alfa.
Okay, so professionally, Alfa is the first place I worked. So after graduating in 2016, I started here in November. And I've had a few different roles at Alfa. So when I first started, I thought I wanted to be an implementation consultant and go onto client site and help them solve problems. And we get a very technical induction when we first join. And having like an engineering background, I fell in love with the code base when I started. And so that's actually then I started going down the engineering route. And it was from there where we do quite a long induction program right at the beginning. And I really, really valued that. I thought it was amazing that we take people from a whole wide range of backgrounds, especially in terms of degree. And so we have people who haven't particularly been technical before who come through. And so when you get that really thorough induction, I loved that. And I was really keen to try and give back to that when I felt I was able. So after I came through that and I went to be a back-end engineer working predominantly in Java, I asked to get involved in training as quickly as I possibly could. And it was through opportunities which came about through that after a couple of years, I was asked if I would start running the what's called development initiation. And that was the technical induction manager role, which you mentioned earlier. And so,
Fantastic. So ultimately, all of the kind of the techie, the back end, the engineering, Java as the various different kind of platforms and kind of terminology that you're using, you make sense of that basically for a lot of the new starters and the new joiners who haven't necessarily had such a technical background that you have had.
Yes, absolutely. And it's one of the things I love about our company is that when we go and we do recruitment, we have people come in and like I say, they don't have engineering backgrounds all the time. It doesn't have to be computer science backgrounds. We've had people come through with classics. And I've done training for someone who had a biology degree. And one of the things which we were teaching them about is something called aspect-oriented programming. And as they were going through, they made analogies to that with, I think it was called RNA splicing. I really don't remember the details. And they were talking me through that. And I remember different parts of the analogy. I was like, yes, that makes so much sense. And then she went and was then teaching everyone else in her intake because she was able to pick it up because she had that kind of foundation to build upon and relate to. And I think that's one thing which speaks a lot to diversity and inclusion is actually those different ways of thinking don't come from the same places. And so actually you can really build very quickly on those by having those different ways of thinking in a group.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating the way that you describe things. I can see you using your hands there a lot when you're kind of almost explaining the various different pieces. And I think the first time I met you actually in the Alfa office, you were there with a new graduate intake, kind of sticking lots of coloured post-it notes and things like that on the wall. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. There's lots of kind of lots of numbers and symbols. And I was like, oh my goodness, what on earth is all of that? But I guess it's kind of making it relatable. and the way that you learn and then explain to others, when you put it into almost a, whether it's a picture form or the way that you're describing it, it makes it perhaps a lot more easy to understand. And I guess one interesting thing that I have noticed, especially with individuals like yourself, because you're a young leader. I know that you said you're just at the end of the kind of the millennial era in the workforce, almost into the zillennials there. But what I find amazing is how incredibly quickly young leaders can pick up everything, from kind of complex code through to systems architecture and God knows what. And I wonder whether that is because of growing up so prolifically with digital just being an everyday matter of fact piece within everyday life.
Yes, I find it so inspiring whenever we get new intakes through. And it's a really good position that I've had, because you get to meet so many people when they first join the company. And so it's really motivating when people come in, and obviously they're brand new and they really are keen to get stuck in. And at the beginning, I think it can feel quite daunting when you're introduced to this whole new world. And I think there's this idea of unknown unknowns. So it's when you don't know what you don't know yet. And I think it's really important to try and make that feel manageable for people who've come from potentially very academic backgrounds, and they're thinking they've come from a field where they know everything inside out. To then somewhere where it feels like they don't know the basics. So it's amazing how quickly we find people come in and they say, I've never written a line of code before. And by the end of development initiation, they're committing enterprise strength code that can go out and be deployed to clients. It's absolutely incredible the rate at which people grow.
Wow. I have to say, I didn't understand half of what you just said then. So clearly, it's just, it's absolutely fantastic. And, I guess, looking at kind of other aspects, as clearly you said, Alfa is first business that you've been at, came out with a spectacular degree straight into the world of work. And I know from previous experience that Alfa is very, very strong when it comes to corporate social responsibility, very much about fostering an inclusive working environment. And of course, you are leading the LGBTQ plus community. Talk to me a little bit about how that came about and why you're so passionate about that, and whether indeed it was one of the reasons that you actually joined Alfa in the first place.
So it's an interesting one. It wasn't a factor when I first joined, and it's because I actually discovered my bisexuality since joining Alfa. And it's something which I spoke about at a company meeting recently, because I think it's really important that people understand why we have groups like this. So why is it important in, 2020, where we think, oh, okay, aren't there equal rights? Isn't everything kind of done and accomplished? To say, actually, we're kind of rolling a stone up a hill. And the reason I got so involved is because I'm very lucky that I definitely had the ability to establish myself completely separately from any kind of ideas that people may have around my sexuality, and then be introduced to people as someone who is queer. And I think it's really, really important that we're in a world where I don't think you can take it for granted that people's families can necessarily be guaranteed to continue to treat them the same way in light of their sexuality. And I think because of that, people can't be expected to assume that their colleagues will treat them the same way as well. And so I think it's really important for companies to make a very strong stand and say, yes, you will be. Like, you will be accepted here. You will be appreciated here. You will even be celebrated here. We really appreciate you for who you are and what you bring to the organization. And I think making statements like that is so important. And that's why I'm keen to be involved and help spread that message.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal story, Brannan. I think that is it's wonderful. And what's even more fantastic is that you made that public when you were actually at Alfa. It wasn't something that happened beforehand. So it's almost beautiful, really, seeing the personal story that you've gone through, then coming into the workplace and actually feeling comfortable enough that you can genuinely be yourself. And I think that's fantastic. And clearly you felt that the company would be embracing and kind of celebrate this, the uniqueness that you bring into the workforce. Was it after coming out as queer that you then took the opportunity of spearheading the employee resource group for LGBTQ+, or was it that that came first, and then you came out as being queer, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh no, absolutely. I'm happy to answer that. So yes, I can't remember the exact timeline of it. I wasn't the founder of the group. That happened by one of our senior managers, who's incredible. He's a really, really great guy, and he was one of the reasons why I knew immediately that after I was realizing that I identify as queer, that I knew it wasn't going to be a problem in the workplace at all. I was involved in, so we have a wider inclusion umbrella, and underneath that we have the LGBTQ plus community, and we also have a women's working group. And so where I was involved in that top one, it naturally made sense for me to get involved in the initiative that then started coming up around the LGBTQ plus community. When we first started, we didn't have a specific chair or leader. And it was something which the group sort of put forward when we said we wanted to get a bit more structure. And it was actually the founder of it, so the senior manager we have who started the group, who put me forward, and it was that everyone else in the group agreed. And so that was a really big sign of faith, I think. And it's not a responsibility I take lightly. It's a thing of saying, this group has put me forward to try and represent this, and I want to make sure I represent that in the best possible way that I can.
So not only has he been a brilliant role model, he's really had the belief in you and championed you, which everyone else has then agreed with. And how did that make you feel?
Oh, there are a few things which I've been really proud of in my career. That is definitely one of them. It's one of those moments where I look back and you're in a room surrounded by your peers, and they're also, your colleagues and your friends, and feeling that respect is really, really powerful. It's something I really don't take lightly. It's not something I take for granted.
And talk me through the journey that this particular inclusion group has been on, because since you graduated, not only have you obviously come through that personal journey, you then had this great role model, and I know that you've listened to the show before. I absolutely feel that role models are so important in the workplace. So people can not only feel they can achieve that, but if they have some kind of relationship or feel they can relate to that individual, that they also can do it. And I think it really inspires that confidence, which clearly it has in this example that we've given here. But what journey has this particular group been on? Because it seems like it's moved pretty quickly. Not only you've come out of being queer, had this personal journey, you've suddenly been brought into by senior management, which is fantastic. And then there's the nomination piece, and then you've now got, I think when we last spoke, you had a number of people who were already in this group, and you've got another group that sits alongside the LGBTQ plus community on the female side. So talk me through briefly that journey, because I think what would be really wonderful for our listeners to hear, if they don't already have an employee resource group, is how you went from inception to now growing this and really broadening out the movement almost.
Yep. So I think one of the fundamental catalysts for it being able to grow right at the beginning was the senior buy-in we had, and it was immediate. We put the idea forward, and our CEO, Andrew Denton, was just immediately like, absolutely, yes, this is a thing. If we've identified this as a need within the company, it's then something we go forward and meet. And then we started putting some things together, and it was that founding member who then recommended we go to Stonewall and get involved in some of the things which they do. And they have a lot of resources available for groups which are either fledgling or really well established. And so we have a Stonewall representative who we meet with fairly regularly. And we were going through their resources and taking their advice on how can we build this network and then use it to achieve good things. And so at the beginning, it was really about getting buy-in from the rest of the company, because it's one thing to have it from your senior leaders, but obviously that value I was talking about earlier, I think it's important that people understand that, because these are things which, until I think you have some exposure to them, you wouldn't understand why they are important. I know I didn't. I started that journey on my first day at university. I was lucky enough to meet one of my best friends on that first day. And it was through listening to them that I got this whole new lens on, I guess, experiences of life that I've been completely oblivious to up until that point. And so we were doing that. And so we were trying to build knowledge of the group within inside the company. And then we were doing that through things like events. And so we have ally reps as well. So it was the question you asked earlier was, were you involved before the group started? Before you came out as queer, were you involved with the group? And we do have allies who are involved, which I think is amazing. and they've done a presentation in one of the social spaces we have at the company, and it was so well attended, and so many people were taking rainbow lanyards out of that to say, actually, yeah, after hearing that, I do identify as an ally. And so I think it's about showing that this isn't a group for the people who fit into LGBTQ plus. It is for everyone.
I love that you've just said that, because that to me is the epitome of an ally. And when I spend a lot of time in boards or speaking with senior execs, they'll often say to me, well, I think it's great, I don't discriminate or whatever, but I really haven't got much to do with LGBTQ plus, or how can I help a gender network? And I remind them that they are absolutely instrumental in not only furthering the word, but also in that senior management or kind of, C-suite, board level position, or wherever they sit. They hold a huge amount of power and influence. And so it's so important, like you say, that we affiliate ourselves with those who are not only from our direct community, be it LGBTQ plus or be it BAME or whatever, but we look and seek others who then buy in. And what you've described there is almost, it's the listening, it's the storytelling, it's making people understand why and what they can do to really make a sustainable impact, and also the benefit that it has on the rest of the organization, and not just that micro community almost.
Absolutely. And I do think it was our senior buy-in that really helped us achieve that. Our CTO, I believe, has been at every event we've put on. We've had our COO has asked a lot of questions whenever, like that ally one. We were talking for ages after that about loads and loads of different things. The CEO has, where he does a lot of talking to the market and things like that. There are a lot of really inclusive messages that go out there, and some of them are LGBTQ plus specific, especially when I'm interacting with him. But a lot of them are about inclusion more as a whole, which is just so incredibly important. We put together purpose and values, and one of the values we have is make it better together. And actually, in our statement, it says using our diverse people. And so I think it's really core and fundamental to who our company is. That diversity and inclusion is at the heart of it. And for me, I think that's really, really important.
Excellent. And finally, before we run out of time and kind of move into the lightning round, which I'm really looking forward to, okay. I wonder, again, for those who are listening in and thinking, right, great, you know what, let's either start building this, or let's take some of this advice and actually look at how we can further develop through allies or through our own networks, etc., or going to experts like Stonewall. But what kind of feedback did you have that was maybe most positive from running these various different inclusion groups that you think really made a difference?
I think it's been around the pieces which are kind of educational, and it's when people have sort of reached out and sort of said, oh, I've never known about something like this. And for those, I think it's really important, because a lot of the ways I think you can share information around this is by, I think, storytelling is a really, really powerful method of communication. And I think a lot of the stories that come out around this, they end up being quite personal. And so a lot of it is making yourself vulnerable. And then for people to come forward and say, I actually really appreciated that you did that. And it gave me a new lens on something I didn't appreciate before, or even know existed. Those are the things which to me have really stood out.
Fantastic. And I think now that, given COVID-19 and everything that the world is going through, there's never been a better time almost to actually start sharing those vulnerabilities. I think sometimes in the world of work, and clearly this has not been the experience you've had, which is fantastic, but I think there are a lot of people who can't necessarily be their full selves and worry that if they are to be vulnerable, that their position might be jeopardized or something like that. Actually, it's okay sometimes just to say that this is how you are feeling. And if you express that feeling, like you say, it is the absolute best catalyst to have other people then not only share their own stories, but also to really kind of engage within others within the business. And if we're happy and we're feeling like we belong and we're engaging with our community within work, then we're also working so much harder. And I think, building that sense of community clearly digitally right now has never been more important than ever.
Yes. And I think it's something which is really important, is that I think sometimes it's often really clumsy to draw parallels between different types of minorities. I think that the whole context around their history is really informs how people are treated in society and in work. But one thing that does come out is, I think, when someone is comfortable enough to stand up and share, it lowers the barrier to entry for other people to stand up and share. And that's why I think it's so important. And it's I was talking earlier about one of those things which I was really proud of in that moment of being chosen. Another was at the end of one of our intakes, we asked for feedback, and someone just said, "Thank you for making this such an inclusive environment for me to start my career in." And I think the person who said that wasn't queer, but it's they know that they're coming into an environment and a community which really, really appreciates them as an individual.
And if you don't mind me saying so, I think the reason why you're so good at this is because you empathize. And I think leaders in the modern world, those that lack empathy or emotional intelligence, genuinely will really, really struggle. And without going off into another whole podcasting session, which I'm sure we could quite easily do, I think it's that the future of leadership, the future of successful leadership is categorized by almost leading with the heart. And I know that sounds a little bit cheesy, but I think actually when you think of this modern world that we live in, digital is changing so incredibly quickly, and you'll know more about the techie side and the back house side than I will. But when we fast forward 5-10 years and actually things are so incredibly automated, what is it that cannot be automated or replicated is that genuine human touch and that personal feel, being personally vulnerable, giving those personal stories. I'm not saying Alexa can't do it to a certain degree and ask you how you are, but still it is that genuine, emotional, personal piece, and sharing stories and making people feel that they are truly welcome, that makes a difference, and I think really will be the differentiating almost USP for future leaders and future successful businesses.
Yep. I absolutely agree. I think there is so much value, which is in the networks between colleagues, which, yeah, sure, you can go to the nth degree and try and document all of that knowledge which you think is in different people's brains. But actually, I think so much value comes from the interactions that people have and the knowledge which they share between them. And I agree. I don't think there is yet something which can replace that. I think it's so important in leadership and in business.
Absolutely. People over process. Not the process is not important, but people, very, very important indeed. And before we run out of time then, Brannan, and I know that you know what is coming in your life, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to answer each before we go into our summary for today. And it's been a really enjoyable show, actually. So lots and lots of learning points there. And so hope you've enjoyed it as well. Firstly, biggest question, actually, first, what would you say has been your secret to success today?
I think it's the forming an opinion and form it strongly, but then take in new information and be willing to adjust that opinion. So I think there is a mantra which is, I think it's argue like you're right, listen like you're wrong. And I think I was alluded to it earlier. I think my life changed a lot on that first day of university when I was listening to someone for the first time share some life experiences that I had never encountered before in my life. And actually that opened my mind to thinking in so many different ways. I think that's really important. So believe in what you believe in and believe it strongly. And that works as a person as well as in decisions in business. But then in light of new information, recognize that should shift.
I've never heard that quote before. I like it. Argue like you're right, listen like you're wrong. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And who's been your biggest inspiration today? I know you've mentioned quite a few, actually, both personally and professionally during the course of this podcast, but who would you say has been particularly inspiring to you thus far?
I would say it's been a lot of my friends. I think I'm very lucky in that I'm surrounded by people I find very inspirational, and they are people that I want to emulate. I've got one of my friends who's a civil servant, I think represents so much like strength and compassion to her friends that I think is so admirable. I've got friends who are really, really funny, but also really hold you accountable. And I think that's really, really valuable. And I think I look around the different friendship groups that I have, and I think a lot of the traits I look at, I really want to emulate. And I think being kind to one another is so important. And so that's likely a good place to draw that inspiration from.
I love that. And I often give people in business this advice from onboarding or whatever, is it's surrounding yourself by those right people in the workplace, but clearly you're doing it personally as well, which is fantastic. And they say
Yes.
you are the product of, what is it, the top 5 people you spend your time with. And so influence is key. So making sure that you are around those right people, I think, is fantastic advice. And finally, I wonder if you could go back and give, although you're very young anyway, Brannan, which is great, but if you could go back and give yourself, your much younger self, advice right now, or indeed someone who might be struggling to come out or having a tough time at work or at home, what advice might you give to them that you think could be helpful for them in the future?
I think one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given, and it makes a lot of sense, and it comes from a very, very informed place. It came from one of my best friends who I met when I first started at Alfa, was that when I get into spaces where I'm far too critical of myself, she's always said to me, like, would you give that same advice to your best friend? Like, would you say to your best friend what you're saying to yourself right now? And if the answer is no, then maybe you're not being self-critical in a way which is going to help you evolve and move on. You're actually kind of limiting yourself in that.
Interesting. Very good piece of advice. Very good piece of advice. Because I think sometimes it's very easy to be more critical of oneself than it is when you're trying to aid and support somebody else. And so we really should try and make sure we look after ourselves. And like you said, be kind. And there is never more an important time than there is right now, given this mass pandemic, that we actually are genuinely kind and human to one another.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Brannan, for being here today. You've been fantastic.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's like I said beforehand, it's been a nerve-wracking experience, but I've really enjoyed it. It's been it's been good fun.
Well, you've been brilliant. No one will be able to tell at all that you've been nervous. And I think actually what's great is, and what I love about the show specifically is, 1 minute we'll be speaking to, a CEO, a leader. I genuinely think anyone can be a leader. I think the old school hierarchy of kind of almost archetypal leadership is gone. And I think the modern way of leadership is by inspiring and educating and motivating others. And it doesn't matter what age you are or what level you're at, you are a leader, within your own right. And so whether it be speaking to someone who is early stages of their career and really kind of flying the flag for something that means something which has purpose to them, or speaking to an old hat chairman, CEO, who is talking about the things in their life that have also made a difference, I think we can all learn from one another. And think that is one of the things I enjoy most of all, is having the opportunity to speak to lots of different eclectic individuals. So thank you very, very much indeed. And as per usual, I'm going to give a very, very brief summary. And I think there's been some very interesting learning pieces here today. And for those who belong to the LGBTQ plus community, or perhaps do belong and haven't maybe come out yet, I would really, really encourage you to take heed of some of Brannan's advice today, and take heed of the fact that we are only here once. Life is very, very precious. And I think especially at the moment, given the pandemic that we're experiencing, very, very important to stay close, to really be kind to one another, and to speak to others as much as you possibly can. As Brannan has said, if we can share our own personal experiences, and if we can almost put our head above the parapet, so much so that we can describe, whether it be hardships, whether it be challenging times that we're going through in our life, not only is it highly beneficial for yourself, but it's also potentially incredibly beneficial for others, and the ripple effect that you can have on other people who are really learning from your experience of being vulnerable can be astronomical. And so I really would encourage you, if you are having a difficult time or you're struggling, please do reach out, whether it be online. I'm sure Brannan would be very, very happy if someone were to reach out, or people were to reach out on LinkedIn and share their story, or just want an ear to talk to, or of course reach out to myself, or reach out to one of the team here. Very, very happy to discuss, engage and learn. And finally, I think there was some fantastic learning pieces around making sure, if you are going to try and drive change within an organization, that you are going to get buy-in from the top. As we know from previous podcasts and from market research and data, that a lot of these initiatives, especially diversity and inclusion initiatives, they are more effective when they start at the top, because if it is being externalized, that we buy into this as an organization, it gives everyone else that security blanket with which to feel they can properly engage, and they aren't going to be reprimanded or whatever for bringing their full self to the table. So if you can, make sure you get buy-in from leaders at the top. Try and make sure that you build allies. They don't need to be people who belong to the same group. They can be people that belong to other groups, and you can weave together those different communities as well, which is, again, one of the most really rewarding experiences from what Brannan has found, and certainly from what I have found with my experience. So thank you very, very much indeed for listening to today's show. You've been listening to Brannan Hancock from Alfa Financial. My name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis, and you've been listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show, brought to you by Dial Global. We're here with you every week, although we're here a little bit more frequently at the moment, just to help support everyone in uncertain times. You can check out all the show notes and any of the pieces that I mentioned throughout today's podcast on www.dialglobal.org/podcast or www.leilamackenzie.com/podcast. We will look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Thanks again. Bye for now. And thank you again, Brannan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.